Part 1. The beginning, a subtle change. It started with the little things. Lynn had always believed that love was built on the small, everyday details. The way Min used to kiss her forehead before leaving for work. How he'd text her during lunch just to ask how her day was going. Or the way he'd hum their favorite song while washing the dishes. It was the little things that made her feel safe, loved, and certain of their life together. But lately those little things had begun to disappear. It was a Thursday night when Lynn first felt it. A shift so subtle she almost convinced herself she was imagining it. She'd spent the evening preparing Min's favorite meal. Caramelized pork belly with steamed rice and pickled vegetables. The smell of ginger and soy sauce filled the house, mingling with the faint scent of Liam's crayons as their son sat at the kitchen table drawing superheroes. The clock ticked past 7 p.m. Then 8. Then 9. Min's text came at 9:13 p.m. Working late. Don't wait up. Lynn stared at the message for a long time before setting her phone down on the counter. She didn't reply. What was there to say? She glanced at Liam, who had fallen asleep at the table, his head resting on his arm next to a half-finished drawing of a caped hero. By the time Min walked through the door at 11:47 p.m., Lynn had already cleaned up dinner and put Liam to bed. She sat on the couch with a book in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in over an hour. "You're late," she said without looking up. Min froze in the doorway, his tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled. "I told you I'd be working late," he replied, his tone defensive. He set his briefcase down by the door and avoided her gaze as he walked into the kitchen. Lynn closed her book and followed him, watching as he poured himself a glass of water. "You didn't eat," she said softly, nodding toward the untouched plate she'd left for him on the counter. "I grabbed something on the way home," Min muttered, not meeting her eyes. Her stomach tightened as she noticed a faint scent clinging to him. Something floral and unfamiliar, like jasmine mixed with musk. It wasn't his cologne. She would have known if it was. "Where did you eat?" she asked casually, though her voice betrayed none of the unease bubbling inside her. Min hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Just a quick bite with some colleagues." He drained his glass and set it in the sink before turning toward her with a tired smile. "Can we not do this tonight? I'm exhausted." Lynn nodded slowly and stepped aside as he brushed past her toward their bedroom. But as she stood alone in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at the empty plate on the counter, something inside her whispered, "He's lying." Over the next few weeks, Lynn tried to push that whisper away. She told herself that Min was just stressed from work, that his late nights and vague excuses were nothing more than temporary symptoms of a demanding project or difficult client. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, that whisper grew louder with each passing day. Min's behavior became harder to overlook. He started taking his phone everywhere with him, to the bathroom, to bed, even when he went outside to take out the trash. Lynn couldn't remember the last time she'd seen him leave it lying around like he used to. One night, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch watching TV in silence, Lynn glanced over at Min just in time to see him tilt his phone away from her view as a notification popped up on the screen. "Who's texting you this late?" she asked lightly. "No one important," Min replied quickly, locking his phone and setting it face down on the coffee table. Lynn smiled faintly but said nothing more. Inside, though, her mind raced with questions she didn't dare ask out loud. The breaking point came on their anniversary. Lynn had spent weeks planning everything. A sitter for Liam, reservations at an upscale restaurant downtown where they'd celebrated their first anniversary years ago, even a new dress that made her feel beautiful in a way she hadn't felt in months. But at 6:42 p.m., just minutes before they were supposed to leave, Min called from his office. "Something came up," he said apologetically. "I can't make dinner tonight." Lynn gripped her phone tightly as she stared at herself in the mirror, the dress hugging her curves perfectly, her makeup flawless except for the tears threatening to spill over. "It's fine," she said quietly before hanging up. But it wasn't fine. Instead of going home after canceling their plans, Min didn't return until nearly midnight. And when he did, Lynn noticed lipstick smudged faintly on his collar. She didn't say anything that night or even the next day. But something inside her shifted permanently. A week later came the call. It was late, past midnight, and Lynn lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling while Min snored softly beside her. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand beside her. Not hers but Min's phone lighting up with an incoming call from an unknown number labeled only as work. Curiosity got the better of her as she reached over and picked up his phone, but before she could answer it stopped ringing. Moments later came a text. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night, love." Lynn's blood ran cold as she stared at those words glowing on his screen. For weeks, months, she'd ignored every red flag and silenced every doubt because she wanted so desperately to believe that Min was still her Min, the man who'd promised forever under twinkling fairy lights on their wedding day. But now there was no denying what had been staring back at her all along. Something was broken between them, and Min wasn't trying to fix it. As Lynn lay awake that night clutching Min's phone tightly against her chest while tears streamed silently down her face, one thought consumed every corner of her mind. This isn't over. Because if Min thought he could lie his way out of this, or worse, continue living two lives without consequence, he didn't know who he was dealing with yet. And Lynn? She wasn't about to let him get away with it. Part 2: The Investigation. The first clues. The first time Lynn decided to investigate, she told herself it wasn't about mistrust, it was about clarity. She sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, the blue glow of the screen illuminating her face in the darkened room. Min was upstairs, asleep as usual, his phone tucked under his pillow like a secret he couldn't bear to let go of. Lynn's hands hovered over the keyboard, her heart pounding as she typed his phone number into a reverse lookup site. It felt wrong, like crossing an invisible line, but the unanswered questions had grown too loud to ignore. Who was texting him at midnight? Why did he smell like perfume that wasn't hers? And why did she feel like a stranger in her own marriage? The search came back empty. No name, no address, just an area code that told her what she already knew. The number wasn't local. Lynn closed the laptop with a sigh, her chest tightening with frustration. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 2:13 a.m., and wondered how long she could keep living like this, caught between suspicion and denial. The next day, Lynn decided to follow Min. It wasn't planned, it just happened. He left the house at 7:30 a.m., gym bag slung over his shoulder, and kissed her cheek absent-mindedly before walking out the door. Lynn watched him through the window as he got into his car and drove away, her mind racing with possibilities. She grabbed her keys and followed him at a safe distance, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as she trailed his car through the quiet streets of their neighborhood. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to convince herself that this was crazy, that she'd find him at the gym like he said, and all of this would be nothing but paranoia. But Min didn't go to the gym. He drove across town to a small cafe tucked away on a side street Lynn had never been to before. She parked a few spaces down and watched as he walked inside. His posture relaxed in a way that made her stomach churn. A few minutes later, a woman joined him, a woman Lynn didn't recognize. She was tall and elegant, with long black hair that cascaded over her shoulders like silk. She smiled at Min as she sat down across from him and he smiled back, a smile Lynn hadn't seen in months. Lynn's breath caught in her throat as she watched them through the cafe window. Their heads bent close together as they talked and laughed like old friends, or something more. Her chest tightened with a mix of anger and heartbreak, as she realized that this wasn't just about late nights or suspicious texts. This was something deeper, something real. She snapped a photo with her phone before driving away, tears blurring her vision as she gripped the steering wheel tightly. That night, Lynn confronted Min for the first time. "Who is she?" she asked quietly as they sat across from each other at the dinner table. Liam was upstairs playing video games, oblivious to the tension crackling between his parents like static electricity. Min looked up from his plate, his brow furrowing in confusion, or maybe it was guilt. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "The woman you met at the cafe this morning," Lynn said evenly, sliding her phone across the table so he could see the photo she'd taken. "Who is she?" Min's face went pale as he stared at the screen, but he recovered quickly, his expression hardening into something cold and defensive. "She's a client," he said flatly. "We were discussing business." "At a cafe?" Lynn shot back, her voice rising despite herself. "On your day off?" Min pushed his chair back abruptly and stood up, towering over her with an intensity that made her stomach twist uncomfortably. "I don't have to explain myself to you," he snapped, grabbing his plate and storming into the kitchen without another word. Lynn sat alone at the table for a long time after that, staring at the empty chair across from her and wondering how they'd gotten here. How two people who had once loved each other so deeply could feel so far apart now. The following week brought more questions than answers. Min became more secretive than ever, locking his phone with a new passcode, coming home even later than usual, and avoiding Lin's gaze whenever they were in the same room together. But Lin refused to give up. One afternoon while Min was at work and Liam was at school, Lin searched their bedroom for anything that might give her answers. Anything that might explain why Min had become someone she barely recognized anymore. She found it in his gym bag. Tucked beneath a towel and an old pair of sneakers was a receipt from a hotel downtown. A receipt dated 2 weeks ago for a room booked under Min's name. Lin's hands trembled as she stared at it, the proof she'd been searching for but had hoped never to find. That evening while Min was in the shower, Lin received another text message on his phone. A text from an unknown number that read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night, love." Her chest tightened as she stared at those words glowing on his screen. The final confirmation of everything she'd feared. When Min emerged from the bathroom moments later looking relaxed and oblivious to what Lin had just discovered, something inside her snapped. She didn't confront him, not yet, but she knew what she had to do next. Because if Min thought he could keep lying to her without consequence, he was wrong. And Lin? She wasn't going down without a fight. Part 3, The Hidden Truth. Lin had always believed that the truth, no matter how painful, was better than living in the shadows of lies. But as she stared at the hotel receipt in her trembling hands, she realized that some truths weren't just painful. They were devastating. She sat on the edge of her bed, the room around her feeling impossibly small, like the walls were closing in. Min was downstairs laughing softly as he played video games with Liam. The sound of their voices drifted up to her, a cruel reminder of the life they'd built together, the life that now felt like a carefully constructed illusion. Lin's mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. The late nights, the secret of phone calls, the unfamiliar perfume. All of it pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Min was hiding something. And whatever it was, it had shattered the foundation of their marriage. She wanted to confront him right then and there, to throw the receipt in his face and demand answers. But something held her back. A quiet voice in the back of her mind whispering that she needed more. More proof. More clarity. More control. The next morning, Lin woke early and made herself a cup of coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she poured the steaming liquid into her favorite mug. She stared out the kitchen window at the garden below, its flowers blooming brightly despite the storm brewing inside her. When Min came downstairs, he kissed her cheek like he always did, like nothing had changed, and grabbed his gym bag from the counter. "I'll be back by noon," he said casually before heading out the door. Lin waited until she heard his car pull away before grabbing her keys and following him once again. This time she was prepared. Her phone fully charged and her resolve stronger than ever. She trailed him through the city streets, keeping a safe distance as he drove toward downtown. Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched him park outside a sleek apartment building, a place she'd never seen before, and step inside without hesitation. For a moment Lin considered turning back. What if she didn't want to know what was inside? What if knowing only made things worse? But then she thought about Liam, about how he deserved parents who were honest and trustworthy, and pushed those doubts aside. Lin waited in her car for nearly an hour before Min finally emerged from the building, his expression relaxed and his posture confident in a way that made her stomach churn. He wasn't alone this time. The woman from the cafe walked beside him, laughing softly as they climbed into a red Toyota parked nearby. Lin snapped several photos with her phone before driving away, tears streaming down her face as she gripped the steering wheel tightly. That evening, Lin sat alone at the dining table, staring at the photos on her phone with a mix of anger and heartbreak. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself any longer. She needed answers. When Min walked through the door later that night, Lin didn't wait for him to make excuses or pretend everything was fine. "Who is she?" Lin asked quietly, holding up her phone so he could see the photos. Min froze in place, his eyes widening as he stared at the screen. "She's no one," he said quickly, his voice defensive. "No one," Lin repeated bitterly. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back, and you expect me to believe she's no one?" Min's face hardened as he set his briefcase down on the counter. "You're overreacting," he said coldly. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, Lynn demanded. But Min didn't answer. Instead, he turned away from her and walked upstairs without another word. The following days were a blur of silence and tension as Lynn tried to make sense of what had happened and what she needed to do next. She spent hours combing through their shared phone records and credit card statements, piecing together fragments of Min's secret life like a puzzle that refused to fit together. What she found was worse than anything she could have imagined. Hotel bookings under fake names, expensive dinners charged to their joint account, and countless messages exchanged between Min and Tao. Lynn's chest tightened as she read through those messages, their tone intimate and affectionate in a way that made her stomach churn. One night while Min was asleep beside her, his breathing steady and his expression peaceful, Lynn received another text message on his phone. This time it read, "I miss you already, love." Her hands trembled as she stared at those words glowing on his screen, the final confirmation of everything she'd feared. She wanted to wake him up right then and there, to demand answers and force him to confront what he'd done, but something held her back once again. Because Lynn knew this wasn't just about infidelity, it was about betrayal on every level imaginable. And if Min thought he could keep hiding behind lies without consequence, he was wrong. The next morning brought clarity, not just about what Min had done but about what Lynn needed to do next. She packed Liam's lunch with care before sending him off to school with a kiss on his forehead, a reminder that no matter what happened next, she would protect him at all costs. Then Lynn sat down at their dining table with every piece of evidence spread out before her, photos from the cafe meeting, screenshots of text messages, receipts from hotels, credit card statements detailing dinners for two, and began planning how best to confront Min once and for all. Because while some truths might be devastating, they were also necessary. And Lynn wasn't afraid anymore. Not of what she'd find or what came next, but of losing herself in someone else's lies forever. Part 4. The confrontation, the truth revealed. Lynn had spent days preparing for this moment, but as she sat at the dining table that evening, her hands trembling slightly, she wondered if she was truly ready. The evidence was laid out in front of her. Photos, receipts, text messages. All of it damning, all of it undeniable. She had rehearsed what she would say 100 times in her head, but now that the moment was here, her throat felt dry, and her heart pounded like a drum. The sound of Min's car pulling into the driveway snapped her out of her thoughts. She straightened in her chair, forcing herself to breathe deeply. This wasn't just about confronting him. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her truth, and her power. When Min walked through the door, he looked tired. He dropped his briefcase by the door and loosened his tie as he glanced toward the kitchen. "Hey," he said casually. "What's for dinner?" Lynn didn't answer. Instead, she gestured toward the dining table where all the evidence was spread out like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. Min froze mid-step, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight before him. "What is this?" he asked, his voice cautious. "You tell me," Lynn replied evenly, her voice calm but laced with steel. Min hesitated for a moment before walking closer to the table. His eyes scanned the photos of him and Tao at the cafe, the hotel receipts with his name on them, and the screenshots of their text messages glowing on Lynn's phone screen. "This isn't what it looks like," he said quickly, his voice defensive. Lynn let out a bitter laugh, a sound that was sharp and cold and filled with years of frustration and heartbreak. "Not what it looks like," she repeated incredulously. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back. And you expect me to believe this isn't what it looks like?" Min opened his mouth to respond but closed it again when he saw the look in her eyes, a look that told him there was no point in lying anymore. "Fine," he said quietly, sinking into the chair across from her. "You want the truth?" "Yes, I've been seeing someone else." The words hit Lynn like a physical blow, even though she had already known them deep down. Hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that nothing else could. For a moment she couldn't breathe. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. "Why would you do this to us?" "To Liam." Min ran a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze. "I don't know," he admitted after a long silence. "It just happened." "It just happened?" Lynn repeated bitterly, her voice rising despite herself. "You don't just happen to book hotel rooms and send love notes to someone who isn't your wife." Min flinched at her words but didn't argue. Instead, he buried his face in his hands and let out a heavy sigh. A sound filled with guilt and regret but not nearly enough remorse to make up for what he'd done. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Lynn stared at Min across the table, searching his face for some sign of the man she had married. The man who had once promised to love and cherish her forever. "You owe me more than this," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady now, calm but unyielding. "You owe me an explanation." Min hesitated before nodding slowly. "Her name is Tao," he began reluctantly. "We met through work. She's one of my clients." Lynn clenched her fists under the table as Min continued speaking, telling her about late-night meetings that turned into dinners, about texts that started off professional but quickly became personal, about how Tao made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," Min said quietly when he finished speaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," Lynn replied softly, tears brimming in her eyes despite herself. "You hurt me and Liam. And everything we've worked so hard for." Min looked down at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. That night after Min had gone upstairs to bed, leaving Lynn alone with her thoughts, she sat at the dining table for hours trying to make sense of everything he had told her. She thought about their wedding day, the way Min had held her hand so tightly as they exchanged vows under twinkling fairy lights, about all the little moments they had shared over the years that had made their life together feel so full and beautiful, about how easily it had all fallen apart. By the time Lynn finally went upstairs to bed herself, lying down beside Min but feeling worlds apart from him, she knew one thing for certain: their marriage would never be the same again. The next morning brought clarity, not just about what Min had done but about what Lynn needed to do next. She spent hours consulting with a lawyer while Liam was at school, making sure she understood her rights and how best to protect herself and her son if things got worse. She also reached out to friends who'd been through similar situations, seeking advice on how best to navigate this new reality without losing herself in anger or despair. But most importantly, she started planning how best to confront Tao. Not out of jealousy or spite, but because Lynn deserved answers from both sides before deciding how best to move forward. That evening while Min was at work again, or so he claimed, Lynn drove across town toward Tao's apartment building, the same place where she'd seen Min enter just days earlier. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs toward Tao's door. But when it finally opened, revealing not just Tao but also another man standing beside her, Lynn realized something shocking. Min hadn't just been lying about their relationship, he'd been lying about everything. Because while Tao might have been part of Min's secret life, she wasn't alone in keeping secrets from him either. And suddenly, everything made sense, and nothing would ever be the same again. Part 5. The Resolution, Reunion and Perfect Revenge. Lynn had always believed in the idea of closure. She thought it was something you could find like a missing piece of a puzzle, something that would make everything fit together and finally make sense. But as she stood in her living room that morning, staring at the packed suitcases by the door, she realized that closure wasn't something you found. It was something you created. It had been 3 weeks since her confrontation with Min. 3 weeks filled with silence and tension so thick it felt like the walls of their home were suffocating her. Min had tried to apologize, of course. He'd said all the right things, how sorry he was, how it was a mistake, how he wanted to fix things for their family. But Lynn couldn't unhear his confession or forget the betrayal etched into every receipt and text message she'd uncovered. And then there was Tao. The meeting at Tao's apartment had been unexpected, but it had given Lynn something she hadn't realized she needed: clarity. Tao wasn't just Min's secret. She was part of a larger web of deception that Min had spun over months, maybe even years. And while Tao's role in all of this hurt, it also gave Lynn a strange sense of power, because now she knew everything. Lynn's plan began to take shape the day after her visit to Tao's apartment. She sat at the dining table, the same table where she'd confronted Min, with a notebook in front of her and a pen in hand. She wrote down everything she knew: dates, locations, names, and every piece of evidence she'd collected. It wasn't just about confronting Min anymore. It was about ensuring that he faced the consequences of his actions in every aspect of his life. The first step was legal. Lynn met with her lawyer again, this time with a clear goal in mind: divorce. She wanted full custody of Liam and a fair division of their assets. Assets that Min had used to fund his secret life with Tao. The lawyer assured her that with the evidence she had, there was no way Min could contest her terms. The second step was personal. Lin reached out to Tao, not out of anger or spite, but because she needed to understand why someone would willingly be part of such a betrayal. To her surprise, Tao agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe downtown. When they sat across from each other, Lin saw a woman who looked just as tired and broken as she felt. Tao admitted that she hadn't known about Lin or Liam at first, that Min had told her he was separated and working through a complicated divorce. By the time she found out the truth, she said, it felt too late to walk away. I'm not proud of what I did, Tao said quietly, stirring her coffee without looking up. But I didn't know how to stop. Lin nodded slowly, her anger softening into something closer to pity. You should have stopped, she said simply before standing up and leaving the cafe without another word. The final step was public. Min worked for a company that prided itself on its values, integrity, honesty, professionalism, and Lin knew exactly how much he valued his reputation there. So she sent an anonymous email to his boss with copies of the receipts and photos attached. She didn't include any personal details or accusations. She simply let the evidence speak for itself. Within days, Min was called into a meeting with HR and placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into his conduct. When he came home that evening, his face pale and his hands shaking, Lin didn't say anything. She simply handed him the divorce papers and told him to sign them. This doesn't have to get uglier than it already is, she said calmly as he stared at the papers in disbelief. You're really doing this? Min asked weakly. I'm doing what I should have done weeks ago, Lin replied before walking upstairs to check on Liam. The day Lin and Liam moved out felt like stepping into sunlight after years spent in darkness. Their new apartment wasn't big or fancy. It was small and cozy with just enough space for the two of them, but it felt like freedom in a way their old house never had. Liam adjusted quickly. Children always do. And soon their days were filled with laughter and routines that didn't include walking on eggshells around Min's moods or lies. For Lin, it wasn't just about starting over. It was about rediscovering herself after years spent putting everyone else first. She started painting again, something she hadn't done since college, and even signed up for an art class at the community center downtown. She reconnected with old friends who reminded her of who she used to be before life became so complicated. And slowly but surely she began to heal. One evening as Lin sat on the balcony watching Liam play with his toys in their small backyard below, her phone buzzed with a notification. An email from HR at Min's company confirming that he had been terminated following their investigation. Lin stared at the email for a long moment before deleting it without replying. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. And knowing that justice had been served gave her all the closure she needed. Months later, when Lin ran into Tao by chance at a local market, a chance encounter neither woman expected, they exchanged polite smiles but didn't stop to talk. There was nothing left to say because both women understood something now. They weren't enemies, they were survivors, and sometimes survival meant letting go of everything except your own peace. Lin didn't regret confronting Min or exposing his lies because doing so gave her back something far more valuable than any marriage could ever provide. Herself. And as she stood on her balcony watching Liam laugh under the setting sun, she knew one thing for certain. She hadn't just survived this storm. She'd come out stronger than ever before, and ready for whatever came next.